There is more than one book titled What is Philosophy by eminent philosophers. Deleuze and Guattari have one volume with this title, What is Philosophy? So here we raise a question about its origins, how it begins. Again, there are many possible answers to this question. And one possible answer is this: when or where myths no longer offer a satisfactory explanation for existence. You may find it strange to connect myth with philosophy. In fact, even though many myths are misleading in a sense, they have or they had a different function, especially in the early days of humanity. Myth was a way of explaining things, explaining phenomena that people did not understand. For example, when there is a natural calamity, now using science and all, we can attempt an explanation. But when we are not equipped with any such knowledge, it will be a more difficult problem. So during the early days of mythology, people used myths to explain things. Like there is, if there is excessive rain and all that, you explain it in terms of a rain god. The rain god is angry, so this is what happens. We have more rains, we have floods, because the rain god is angry. And maybe reasons for this rain god becoming angry will also be given. And there are myths about creation, how the world came into being. Because after a certain point, people must have started to wonder about existence. I'm talking about a time when none of these bodies of knowledge existed. Even children, sometimes, if they are intelligent enough, they wonder, what is it all about? What is this life? So in the childhood of humanity, people must have wondered about things. And the early answers they formulated were based on myths. And so even otherwise, even when the question of wonder is not there, you require a world picture to live in this world. You should have an idea about the world where you live. So a world picture is always necessary. So before philosophy, myth was providing people with this world picture. They were interpreting things in mythical terms. They understood the world around them in terms of gods and goddesses and similar other things. And this quote from a book on enlightenment. Enlightenment in the context of enlightenment rationality. was written by two people who belonged to the Frankfurt School of Social Sciences, Adorno and Horkheimer. So they are trying to find some similarities between rational thinking and myths. In the beginning, myth had a similar function, but myth doesn't use reasoning. Myth doesn't use the power of reasoning. Instead, it uses imagination. Using imagination, it interprets things. But it could perform a set of functions. Myths, so to report, to name, to tell of origins. In other words, myths try to explain a number of things. And but therefore also to narrate, record, explain. This tendency was reinforced by the recording and collecting of myths, which of course happened afterwards. So when you take the example of Greece, in the 8th century BC, we have the first great literary works written by Homer mainly, and also Hesiod. And if you read those books, those texts, you will understand that they are artistically perfect, even by today's standards. They are great poems, and they make a very heavy use of mythology. Many of its characters come from the mythical world, and Homer's readers, they were all familiar with these myths. And when you come to the next century, the 7th century BC, we find another tendency developing in Greece. It was the evolution of lyric poetry. From the world of the epic, from the world of myths, people moved on to a very personal world. Because lyrics are basically about personal experiences, personal feelings and emotions. So if lyric poetry flourished in a century, in a particular century, it means that people were becoming subjective during that period. They were looking inside themselves. They were looking within. They were looking within and they were finding things and they wanted to talk about it. And they used the medium of the lyric to talk about it. And then, slowly, after one more century, in the 5th century BC, we find the first Greek philosopher emerging. That was Thales, 6th century BC. And Thales started philosophizing with a statement that you may find ridiculous today. He says, it is necessary for us to take serious notice of this proposition. It is, and for 3 reasons. First, because it tells something about the primal origin of all things. And that is what mythology had been doing, telling about origins, how this world was created by one god or the other. In Greek mythology, they had a number of gods. It was a polytheistic faith that the Greeks had. So that was then. Second, because it does so in language devoid of image and fable. Language devoid the language of image and fable, you find in literature, you find in mythology. Literature uses images, imagery. Literature uses fables. The same can be said about mythology. But philosophy is a totally different enterprise. It should not use fables as its mainstay. Of course, it can refer to fables, it can make use of fables, but that is not the foundation of philosophic discourse. It is the use of reason. That is the use of the rational faculty. That is what distinguishes philosophy from mythology. Philosophy is an attempt to understand things in rational terms. Philosophy tries to create a world picture that is rationally coherent. A logically foolproof world picture. And rationalism, modern rationalism, started to flourish after the Renaissance. In fact, a period in European history is known as the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason. That is the 17th and the 18th century, mainly the 18th century. The 17th century also. That is the period from philosophers like Descartes, Hume, and many others. That was when there was a rejection of the God-centered world and an attempt to create a rational picture of the world. Of course, many of these people, many of these thinkers were believers. They believed in religion as well. At the same time, they were in their philosophic thinking, they wanted to create a world picture that was basically rational. Reason became all important. So that is in the 18th century. Let's go back to Thales. So he doesn't use the language of image and fable. So he doesn't use the language of poetry or mythology. And finally, because contained in it, if only embryonically, is the thought, all things are one. So that is what makes Thales a philosopher, says Nietzsche. He has a vision of a fundamental unity of life, the fundamental unity of life. That concept is formed, perhaps for the first time in the history of human thinking. So he finds an explanation. He tries to explain existence in terms of this one principle. So Thales is believed to be the first Greek philosopher. Even though his argument looks a bit absurd now, we should appreciate the fact that that moment, that was the moment when philosophy started. And after Thales, there are many other Greek philosophers, we cannot mention all of them. Another important figure, as far as Plato is concerned. Another important figure is Pythagoras. Maybe you are familiar with the name because of the Pythagoras theorem. He was a mathematician, a philosopher, and also a mystic. He had a very curious, a strange kind of religious faith. He believed in the transmigration of souls. That is, he believed in other words, he believed in reincarnation. And he was against killing animals and eating them. Because of this notion of reincarnation. Maybe you'll be killing somebody who is related to you, which has become an animal in this incarnation. That was the argument. And for a similar strange reason, he was also against eating beans. So all those things we can ignore. In early Greek thinking, we find many such absurd things. Along with those absurd things, we also find brilliant insights, taking philosophy forward. And Plato himself had a number of superstitions. He himself has said a number of ridiculous things. He too believed in this idea of transmigration of souls, just like Pythagoras. But he developed the theory that number is the first principle of everything. For Thales, it was water. For Pythagoras, it is number. Meaning, he became aware of something abstract, which is represented by something abstract that is represented by number as the basis of everything. So he is talking about the existence of abstract ideas being the prime cause of existence. So now we enter the world of abstract ideas as represented by mathematics. And mathematics and philosophy are closely linked, as you know. When you discuss Descartes here, you know more about it. He was a mathematician as well. And there was another philosopher who was a mathematician, a serious mathematician, Pascal. And in our time, we have Alain Badiou. He uses a lot of mathematics. That is where I stopped reading Badiou, which is so abstract and difficult. I left it like that. The other books some of them I've tried. Those books are okay. But in his major work, being an event, there is a lot of mathematics, set theory and all that. I was poor in mathematics long back, so I did not even make an attempt to return to mathematics and read Badiou again. Anyway, so this connection between philosophy and mathematics was established in the 5th century BC by Pythagoras. And that was another influence on Plato's thinking. So this is what? Number is what keeps the universe in harmony. That was Pythagoras' idea. In other words, he argued that everything can be explained in mathematical terms. You can have an explanation for the world. That's what philosophy is all about. Philosophy tries to tell you what this world is, what your existence is. And Pythagoras' answer was that everything can be explained in mathematical terms, meaning using a language that is systematic and at the same time abstract. Mathematics uses a language that is abstract, basically. So, using the language of abstraction, you can explain reality. That was the major contribution of Pythagoras towards philosophy. He is also remembered, as you know, as a mathematician. We all studied him, his theorem, when we were at school. Anyway, so this was a major influence on Plato. Plato again goes into the idea of abstract thinking Then comes, you look at the dates. Pythagoras was born in 571, he died in 496. Heraclitus, a few years younger, he was born in 540 and he died in 480 BC. Heraclitus was a very different kind of philosopher. You must be familiar with Heraclitus also, because you must have heard his most famous statement: "You cannot step into the same river twice." Why did he say so? There are two reasons for that. One reason is obvious: the river is constantly changing, second by second. Or as Yates says in History 1916, minute by minute they change. So that is one reason. The river is constantly changing. The river is constantly renewing itself. What is the other reason? There are two reasons why you cannot step into the same river twice.
One may be taken away by the river.
No. Let's imagine a shallow river for that. Shallow, not very deep. The current is not very powerful, but still it's flowing. You too are changing. You do not remain the same. You too are changing. And this is true in a scientific sense as well. Because you just think about the cells of your body. They are constantly renewing themselves. And think about your mind. It's always on the move. You are constantly changing. Anyway, that was one of the central ideas of Heraclitus. Flux. The idea of flux. The idea that everything is constantly changing. In other words, change is the only constant factor. Change is the only changeless thing. And for him, the primary element was fire. It was water for Thales, number for Pythagoras. For Heraclitus, it was fire. And this change takes place through the interaction of opposite principles. And that is another key idea that is associated with Heraclitus. He is the first dialectical thinker. That is, he believes that opposite principles, the interaction, the conflict between opposite principles, this conflict is behind everything that happens in the world. The conflict of opposites. And that's a continuous process. And when we come to the 18th century or the 19th century, we have philosophers like Hegel using the same idea. Hegel's thinking is based on dialectics. Hegel is a dialectical thinker. And of course, a few years after that, after Hegel's works were all developed, Hegel's ideas were all developed, Marx started his work. Again, he was a dialectician as well as a materialist. There's a major difference between Marx and Hegel. Anyway, you're going to discuss those things later on. So Heraclitus, Marx also is a dialectical thinker. And Heraclitus was the first person to talk about the skirmish, the conflict between opposites. And again, he underlines the fundamental unity of existence and says that this unity depends on opposition. An apparently paradoxical statement. It is through the operation of opposites that everything in this world moves. And we are aware of some of them. Anyway, so he is not talking about a world that remains still. He is talking about a world that is changing constantly. And that is why he is regarded as the philosopher of becoming. He is the philosopher of becoming. He is not the philosopher of being. And being is an idea, a concept that comes back to philosophy again and again and again. It started with it started in the Greek antiquity, and even in our time, people philosophers use the word in the titles of their books. Being and time by Heidegger, being a nothingness by Sartre, being an event by Matthew, to mention just three examples. So being is one of the fundamental, one of the central concerns of philosophy all these centuries. But Heraclitus was not a philosopher of being, but he was a philosopher of becoming, because he was constantly talking about flux or change or transformation. These are some quotes from Heraclitus. As they step into the same rivers, other and still other waters flow upon them. One cannot step twice into the same river, nor can one grasp any mortal substance in a stable condition, but it scatters and again gathers, it forms and dissolves, approaches and departs. Homer was wrong when he said, would that conflict might vanish from among gods and men. Homer was talking about the conflict between humans. The conflict between humans which will ultimately cause wars and such things. So after writing Iliad, it is natural that Homer said so, because he was writing a poem about a devastating war, a war that destroyed Troy. It's a great tragedy. It's a sad story. And naturally, such a poet would wonder, would that conflict might vanish from among gods and men. And Heraclitus is not saying that people should fight with one another, but that conflict is something that you cannot deny in this world. Conflict will be there constantly. Because without the conflict between opposites, existence cannot continue. So we are aware of these opposing forces. We breathe in, then we breathe out. And for everything that is positive, there is equally there is something negative. And then, so this is something that cannot be evaded. You cannot wish conflict away. It will be there. And it's generally believed that Parmenides wrote a book to refute the ideas of Heraclitus. That is, we are not certain about it, but still, considering that Parmenides was a bit more young than Heraclitus, he desired to write and refute the ideas of Heraclitus. saying that and rejecting Heraclitus's theory absolutely. He says, in spite of the multiplicity of existing things, in spite of their being in a state of flux, their movement, existence is basically one. He emphasizes unity, he emphasizes the eternal reality of existence. Maybe it's true that things are changing constantly, but being is there and it will be there forever. So, for the first time in the history of thought, somebody is talking about the concept of being. And you'll be hearing more about being when Heidegger is being discussed here. In Being and Time, Heidegger devotes a lot of space to this idea to tell his readers what he means by the term being. For a philosopher like Heidegger or a philosopher like Parmenides, being is something that is astonishing. It exists. And that is the most astonishing thing a philosopher can find. Existence. Things exist. And it's really astonishing. We are not astonished by being because we take it for granted. We just take it for granted. We don't really wonder about it. All these things are there, but there is another possibility. They could not have been there as well. And anyway, he is the one who started to talk about the idea of being. And there he was refuting the thought of Heraclitus, who emphasized becoming over being. So, for the first time in the history of thought, a theory of being is formulated. And that led to the formation of ontology. Ontology is a branch of philosophy, the branch of philosophy that studies being. Comes from the Latin word ontologia. Of course, Parmenides did not use the word ontology. The word became current in the 17th and 18th centuries, ontology. Before that, there were philosophers who thought and wrote about being. Like, in fact, he was the first one to do so. And he wrote these things in a book, in a poem titled On Nature. And only a few fragments of this book survive. And the basic idea is that all is one. There is the unity of all existence, which apparently Heraclitus denies. Heraclitus is constantly talking about changes. So we live in a world where everything is changing. There is no doubt about that. Things change. At the same time, there are things which are there eternally. Both are true. We will come to that later. So the idea Parmenides put forward was this: truth exists by itself and is never subject to change. So change is there, but these changes will never undermine truth. These changes will never affect truth. And he even says that this notion of change actually is illusory. an illusion created by the human senses. We perceive things through the senses, and the senses actually deceive you. Apparently change is there, but that is only an appearance. In reality, nothing changes. It all remains the same. And later on, another school of philosophers called atomists said the same thing. So for them, the prime element was the atom. The atom will remain. Whatever happens, after changes may happen, but at atomic level, things will remain the same. And again, this school of philosophy also existed before Plato. Democritus was one well-known atomist. So the idea that Parmenides wanted to underline was that truth remains unchanged. It is unchanging, it is eternal. So in spite of all the changes that you witness, one should remember that truth is eternal. That is Parmenides' idea. And this, you find the same idea in Plato. Plato also talks about things which are permanent and unchanging. Plato, he was born in 427. Some biographers say that it was 428 and 348. We are not sure, but roughly speaking, this is the period during which he lived. And he belonged to a well-to-do family in Athens. And at that time, you know that Athens was a city-state. There was a kind of democracy there, but it was not a very meaningful democracy because a big percentage of the population were slaves and they had no democratic rights. Only a few people had the right to vote and do things. Anyway, it was a democracy. At least that's what they called it. So, and then he became a disciple, a pupil of Socrates as a young man. And Socrates was executed in 399 BC, and Plato was present at the trial and also at the execution. So Socrates was executed because of his ideas. One of the early martyrs who were martyred because of their ideas. And that was in history, that was to happen again and again. So after the execution of Socrates, Plato left Athens. He wandered for a few years. Then he came back, and sometime during the 80s, he founded the academy. That is, usually it's believed that this was the first university. At least we come to a concept of university when we talk about Plato's academy. It was a center for research and learning. Plato's pupil, Aristotle, worked there for about 20 years. He left the place only after Plato's death. Another feature that we notice when we come to Plato is that all his major works are written in the form of dialogues. When we look at it from our 21st century perspective, our modern perspective, we find this rather strange. Nobody writes in the form of dialogues these days. But that was the form Plato chose to use. And he had certain reasons for that. He wanted people to talk about an idea from different perspectives, and so that was the method he adopted. And through these discussions, the truth of the matter will come to light. That was the idea. And Plato's dialogues are known as Socratic dialogues because Socrates features in all these dialogues. We must remember that he started writing these dialogues after the death of Socrates. And being a pupil of Socrates, maybe Plato remembered a lot of things that Socrates said during his lifetime. But even then, there is no guarantee that every word that Socrates utters in Plato's dialogue was uttered by the historical Socrates. So we have to make a distinction between the historical Socrates and the Socrates as he is presented by Plato. But anyway, in the early dialogues, and these are the early dialogues: Apology, Crito, then Euthyphro, and also Ion. Ion, you must have heard about Ion because there is a reference to Homer and all in that dialogue. So in the early dialogues, it is generally believed by critics and philosophers that Plato presents the words of his master. Because in the middle dialogues onwards, Plato starts to use Socrates as his mouthpiece. So that is the second phase. In the early dialogues, instead, he presents what Socrates actually said. Or it may come very close to that. That's how it is usually presented. We are not sure because Socrates had not written anything down. And again, that's another point of dispute: why he didn't write. Still disputed. Anyway, so the early dialogues are more Socratic than the rest because they present the real Socrates, the Socrates of history, as the speaker in these dialogues. But in the middle period, Plato's voice emerges, Plato's philosophy also emerges. That is, and as a result, he starts to use Socrates as his voice. So these are the dialogues of the middle period: Gorgias, Protagoras. Both these people belong to the school of thinkers called the Sophists. We'll come to the Sophists later. Meno, Euthydemus, Cratylus, etc. And the more important ones include Symposium, Republic, and Theaetetus. He was another teacher at the academy. He was a great mathematician, and after his death, Plato wrote this dialogue. And also Parmenides. Parmenides is the same Greek philosopher we were talking about. So there is a dialogue in which, a Platonic dialogue in which Parmenides makes his his appearance. Parmenides, he comes along with his disciple Zeno. Parmenides and Zeno, both of them philosophers. So in the middle, in the dialogues of the middle period, we find Plato using Socrates as his mouthpiece. And Plato's central ideas were all formed during this period. That is, ideas like the doctrine of ideas. He also calls them forms. Forms refer to the eternal, non-corporeal, spiritual entities which can be known only through abstract thoughts. That's what forms are. There's a kind of contradiction there. You use the word form and you talk about things which are absolutely abstract. Anyway, nowadays these are known as universals. Nowadays we don't use the term forms, but modern philosophy uses the term universals. That is, universal principles. Principles which are relevant, which are present everywhere. Anyway, all these theories developed during this period, the theory of ideas and the theory of the immortality of the soul. That was another thing Plato believed in, following Pythagoras. And also, we find the emergence of Plato, the independent thinker, during this period. And the dialogue, Parmenides actually belongs to the middle period. But even there, we find a critical examination of the idea, the critical examination of the theory of forms. He developed this idea during the middle period. And in one book, in one dialogue that he wrote towards the end of that middle period, we find him questioning some of the components of this theory, as if he developed doubts about his own theory. Anyway, that's why Parmenides, the dialogue Parmenides is very significant, because we find Plato raising questions about his own theory there. And in the last phase, these are the dialogues: the sophist, statesman, Philippus, Timaeus, Critias, and Laws. In these dialogues, the idea of the theory of forms is not discussed at all. Also, we do not find Socrates, we do not listen to Socrates very much in the dialogues of this period. He is present, but he is not the primary speaker. So why he used dialogues? Or in other words, why did he use the dialectical method? So in Plato, we find ideas drawn from Heraclitus and also ideas drawn from Parmenides. And as you may have noticed, that these two thinkers were standing at opposite poles. Heraclitus was the philosopher of change, whereas Parmenides was the philosopher of permanence. Exactly the opposite stand was taken by Parmenides. And in Plato, we find these two thinkers He uses the dialectical method. One person makes a statement, the other person questions it, and an argument or a discussion develops. And through this discussion, an idea is exposed. More than that, here it is the reader or the student of Plato, now reading Plato, is invited to go through a process of reason. We undergo a process of reasoning. We listen to it, we read it, we think about it, and it's not a mechanical process, this act of reading. We are invited into the dialogue. You're not just a casual reader, you're an involved reader. And some kind of philosophical activity happens in your mind while you're reading a dialogue. That's what he wanted. And when we think about Plato's major ideas, not many of them are very interesting now. We don't believe in the theory of forms. We don't believe Plato on reincarnation. There are so many problems with many of his ideas. But his significance is here. His commitment to truth. And the method he gives us to arrive at the truth of things. That is what makes Plato a great philosopher. Truth was his primary concern, and through reasoning, we find him finally arriving at it. So that commitment to truth is the very element that makes him a great thinker. He was against the sophists for the same reason, because they were not bothered about truths. Sophists were actually teachers training people in things like rhetoric. Rhetoric was a very popular discipline in ancient Greece. Also, education was a very cumbersome process in ancient Greece. You go to a master, you study with him. For how many years you cannot know. The master will not tell you. You pay a very hefty fees. And after years, maybe after decades, the master may decide that you are educated and then you'll be released. Till then, you'll be paying money, and in one of his books about ancient Greece, Foucault is discussing this. He gives us I forget the details. He gives us an example of this situation in a humorous way. Somebody was studying like this, and the master tells him, "No, it's not time. There are still things to develop." So he was going on like that. Anyway, so that was the kind of teacher the sophist was. And the main thing they gave training in was rhetoric. In oratory, the primary concern is not truth. Oratory is to impress people, to convince people, to convert them onto your side. That's the basic objective. To convert them, to convert other people into your belief. So to make them impressed, you will do anything. You will even lie. That is, truth will not be your primary concern. When you use rhetoric, when you depend on rhetoric. And the philosophers Plato mentions in his dialogues, philosophers associated with this group, they have other problems as well. We will come back to that later, but I'll just give you one example, which we will discuss later on. There was a philosopher called Georgius, a sophist, who makes a series of statements like this. The first statement is nothing exists. Nothing exists in this world. That is the first statement. And from a Heraclitean perspective, you can understand it because things are constantly changing. Nothing is permanent. So that is the first statement is nothing exists. There is nothing in this world. The second statement, if at all something exists, it cannot be known. No knowledge is possible. Maybe there are things. If at all something exists, it cannot be known. Even if it can be known, there is no way of talking about it. So, philosophy is an impossibility. That's the idea. And this is the kind of idea that Plato was against. In a number of dialogues, he encounters the sophists. So anyway, here, using the dialogue, Plato is asking his reader to go through this process of reasoning. And in many of the dialogues, you see that Socrates does not emerge as the victorious figure. Sometimes he does not impress you that much. The point is not that. The point is you have to go through the same process of reasoning. Your mind should never be passive. You're not a passive reader, but you become an active participant in the dialogue. So he is drawing you into the vortex of action. Only that the action involved here is thinking. He will not let you alone. That's what he wants. He wants you to join. He wants you to exercise your faculty of reasoning. And that exercise will make you an educated person. So it's not just for ideas that you read Plato. The kind of education that Plato is planning to give you is not through supplying you with ideas. He is just equipping you to look at things with a fresh mind. He is training your mind to analyze things and understand things. That is, he is training your mind to arrive at the truth. He is asking you never to forget what truth is. So that is the basic procedure here. The reader is invited into a process, the process of reasoning. So along with Socrates and his friends, you also join the inquiry, the probing. And you will not be looking for easy options. You go through the rigors of reasoning. You think along with the master, and you start to philosophize. That is, Plato will make a philosopher out of you. That's what he intends to do. When you are reading his dialogues, he will make you think So instead of, he doesn't give hand over anything on a platter. He doesn't go for easy solutions. He doesn't give you summary in a very short form. The kind of things that our students go for. They don't read the primary text. Instead, they read something else. Very brief summaries. That's not what Plato is about. He does not want to simplify his job. He does not want you to simplify your job as well. He wants you to go through the rigors of thinking. That's what Plato is about. So let's take a look at some of Plato's ideas, like the immortality of the soul. There are dialogues in which he mentions the immortality, the idea of immortality. And this idea in India, many people believe that the soul is immortal and you go through incarnations. Even the atheist religion, like Buddhism, believes in immortality, the soul. Anyway, another related idea is that the soul is in possession of abstract knowledge. The soul, before its birth, before it comes to the earth as a human being, it is in possession of the knowledge of things which are absolute. And it is possible for the soul, even after incarnation, to recollect these things. I think if you are familiar with romantic poetry, if you are familiar with Wordsworth's Immortality Ode, you'll find this very simple. He is talking about the things that he remembered as an infant, and those memories are prenatal. That is about things which he knew, or the soul knew before birth. Anyway, so he had this and similar beliefs. So knowledge, the point is that knowledge is something that you gain through recollection and not through observation, empirical observation, not through reasoning. It is already there. But anyway, this is just to indicate the kind of things that you find, in Plato's dialogues. There are ideas like this, ideas about immortality. And another interesting, this is more interesting than that, his theory of the soul, the components of the soul, the composition of the soul. He divides the soul, he says that the soul has three parts. And these three parts are controlled by reason, spirit, and appetite. And the rational part, obviously, loves reason and is expected to control the other part through acts of reason. So the human being has all these tendencies in him or her. There is the rational part, which prefers to do everything rationally. And there is the spirit part. The spirit part is not what you expect. It has nothing to do with spirituality. The spirit part is associated with feelings of honor, feelings of pride in victory, and things like that. That is, he's talking about the feelings of a particular community, a national community or a local community. When they are proud about something, their spirit is up. That kind of spirit. Then, the part linked with appetite is the field where desire has its sway. Appetite, the appetite for pleasures, mainly. That is, and this is what, in most of the cases, this is what creates, this is the part which creates problems. This part wouldn't want to listen to reason. Desires are not always controlled by reason. And this is something that we are all familiar with. It is not easy always to use reasoning and control your desires. You allow food, the way people drink, the way people indulge in sex, all these things. They do not always listen to their reason. And the idea is that in the ideal situation, all the three parts will be operating in harmony without interfering in the activities of the other. All the three parts will be together working in harmony. But Plato knew that it was not easy to have influence over appetite, the appetite field, because it's difficult to control these desires. And when this happens, when the appetite part gains control over the personality, it leads to a moral failure, which he calls acrasia. The term is not important, but the idea that he divided the mind into three segments. One controlled by reason, the second controlled by spirit, and the third controlled by appetite. And now, naturally, when we read about this now, we'll think about the way Sigmund Freud, talked about the mind. We find him talking about the pleasure principle. The concept of the pleasure principle stands very close to Plato's idea of the appetite part. The pleasure principle is the thing that prompts you to continue your enjoyment, and it also tries to keep you away from things which are painful. And again, so there is one connection with Freud. Another connection is that Freud also divides the mind into three regions or segments. And there are two models, in fact. Let's stick to this one model, the id, ego, superego paradigm. The id, or the unconscious, is the seat of all desires. The ego is where reason is more operative. It is more rational. It tries to be rational. And superego is something that we get from society. It's from, it is controlled by the ideas and beliefs which are propagated by the societies in which we live. It's a social thing. And most of our actions are prompted by or are controlled by this superego. It's not even controlled by your ego. You always think, what will people think? If I do this, what will people think? That is the superego working. So it's a very powerful thing, even though it doesn't belong to you. You get it from your family, your parents, your teachers, and such other people. They got it in the same way. They also say that it's not mine, I got it from society. It's a social thing, influencing all of us, etc. So that's how he thought about the soul. Now come to the core point, the doctrine of ideas. Like Heraclitus before him, Plato was aware of the fact that in the phenomenal world, everything is caught in a process of constant change. So, as a philosopher, he observed that things are changing constantly. So, if you pay your attention only to that aspect, you'll not be able to develop an understanding of things in a balanced way. You know that physics studies dynamics. Dynamics is a branch of physics. Dynamics is about movement. But there is something called statics as well. Statics is the study of, not statistics, statics is the study of bodies which are static, things which do not move. So all these things are, both these things are there. So Heraclitus spoke about movement, whereas Parmenides spoke about permanence. That is, being that is permanent. And Plato wanted to reconcile these opposites. That is why that is one reason why he developed the theory of ideas. Ideas which are timeless and eternal. That is, he's talking about ideas in the divine mind. Ideas which remain the same. Ideas which will never be affected by the passage of time. Because in the first place, these are timeless ideas. But that theory is questioned by a number of people. Because an idea is something that arises out of a concrete material situation. Ideas are not something that exists there waiting for people to be recognized by them. Ideas are human creations, and ideas are created in the material world in specific historic contexts. You cannot isolate them from the historical context in which they are created. That is the materialistic reading of the thing. Anyway, I just mentioned that. That's all. So when he says ideas, he's talking about ideas which are permanent. And for him, that is qualities like beauty, qualities like kindness, love, etc. These are all there in the world of in the realm of ideas, and we only see a shadowy manifestation of these ideas in the world in which we live. We don't know what love really is. We only know a trace of love. We only know a trace of hatred. We only know a trace of kindness, like that. So, knowledge is possible only when you go through a process of education. And as far as Plato is concerned, education is not just the acquiring of skills. Education is not just something that will get you a job. That is not what he means by education. Education is the the process that will enable you to understand eternal truths. Education is something that is connected intimately with truth. Education is something that will make you ready for truth. That's what he means by education. So it's a rigorous process, and it ultimately helps you understand what Plato calls ideas. Ideas are understood only when you are ready for them, and what makes you ready is your education. So education is the training that will enable you to search till you find the truth about something. So to illustrate this idea, he uses the image, the parable or the myth of the cave. This is how he opens the seventh book of Republic. I think you are familiar with the story, like certainly the cave parable, the cave story. So this is the story. Please read it. He imagines a cave, an underground cave, and he imagines a few people living there from the very beginning of their lives, and they are chained in such a way that they cannot even look behind. So they're with their necks and legs fettered so that they are fixed in the same place, able to see only in front of them. Because their fetter prevents them from turning their heads around. Light is provided by a fire burning far above and behind them. They do not see light directly because it is behind them. And in front of them, there is a wall or something like that. There they find shadows falling. Between the prisoners and the fire, there is an elevated road stretching. Imagine that along this road, a low wall has been built, like a screen in front of people that is provided by puppeteers, and above which they show their puppets. So these people sit there looking at the wall, and somebody behind them makes they do something like a puppet show, and because of the light, the shadows fall in front of these people. That is Plato's idea. And they are familiar with this procession of shadows in front of them. In fact, what they know, what they know is the presence of these shadows, nothing else. They have not seen anything. They have not gone out of the cave. They have seen only the shadows. And they also, by being familiar with these shadows for a long while, they must have developed ideas about it. They must have developed theories about the way they appear, the time they appear, the way they behave. Just like they must have developed some kind of literary criticism or something like that. But finally, suppose one person is allowed to look at the fire. What will happen? When one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look up toward the light, he would be pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he had seen before. So he will not be able to face the fire because the fire will be painful to his eyes. That will be the initial reaction. So what do you think he would say if we told him that what he had had seen before was inconsequential, but that now, because he's a bit closer to things that are, and is turned towards things that are more, he sees more correctly. Or, to put it another way, if we pointed to each of the things passing by, asked him what each of them is, and compelled him to answer, don't you think he'll be at a loss, and that he'll believe that the things he saw earlier were truer than the ones he was now being shown? So he was, till now, till seeing the fire, he was sure about his knowledge. But what is his knowledge? His knowledge is the knowledge of shadows. So that's the kind of knowledge we have when we do not have the truth. That's what Plato is trying to tell us. Only when we do not apprehend the truth, our knowledge will resemble the knowledge of a person in Plato's cave. This is about looking at the light behind them. But outside the cave, there is the world with its sun, moon, stars, etc. So if such a person comes out into the open and looks at the sky and the sun and things like that, what will he do? So he'll be shocked, and in fact, it will be a torment for him to look at all that light. So he'll not be ready to face or take in the light that is in front of him. So his eyes will hurt, and he'll go crazy, he'll go mad. There is a possibility of that. So this is the difference between true knowledge and false knowledge. False knowledge in this instance is the knowledge about the shadows. So first he will look at the shadows there in the real world, then slowly, very gradually, he will train his eyes to look at the sky and see light. And this light is the light of true knowledge. So in fact, it has been a tradition in Western thinking to use light as a metaphor for knowledge. I think you are familiar with the term, the age of enlightenment. Enlightenment means the process of the act of shining light on, shining the light of reason on things. The light in the Enlightenment period is the light of reason. It is the light of rational activity. And suppose one who has been outside, he goes back to the cave to tell his friends about what he saw. How many people will believe him? All of them will say that by going out, he ruined his eyes and he lost his sight. If he talks to them about light and all, they will say that he has gone mad. And among them, there will be people who are even ready to kill him. Because this kind of knowledge, we are talking about the knowledge of truth. Truth is not tolerated in every society. So if you have this dangerous knowledge, knowing the truth is a very dangerous thing. So if you possess that knowledge, your life is at risk. And that's the question he raises. And as for anyone who tried to free the prisoners and lead them upward, if they could somehow get their hands on him, wouldn't they kill him? So they will decide that he has lost his mind, talking about these strange things, when they know the truth. They are absolutely certain that they know the truth, because the truth is the procession of shadows. They have no doubts about it. Nobody will be able to convince them that they live in in an illusory world. Nobody will be able to convince them. So that is the condition. And they will not want to change their views. And so, as far as the cave dweller is concerned, truth is a shadow. And if you tell him that that is not the case, he will not believe you. If you try to tell him again and again, he will become angry, he will become even violent, if possible. But he is chained and he cannot move. That is the only thing that prevents him from becoming violent. So they live in a world where truth is kept hidden. And Heidegger, in his works, plays with this idea of hidden truth and how it unhides itself, and so on and so forth. I think you'll be hearing about that soon this week. So here, through this parable, he's trying to tell you about his idea of truth. Truth is there, it's right before you, but it is hidden from you. And it is accessible to you through education. Education means not the kind of education that we see around us, but the kind of education that Plato would recommend. That happens through reasoning, using your reason to find out the truth of things. And there is another, I think we are running out of time, there is another contradiction here, because Plato was the one who wanted to banish poets from his republic. And this is one wonderful piece of poetry. Here he uses a poetic image to illustrate his point. And this is not the only place where he writes so well. He's an excellent writer. And from the very early book dialogues onwards, he's a great craftsman. He's a great writer. Even though he criticizes poets. So the problem is here. Poetry is dangerous only when it is rooted in sophistry. Sophistry is the thing that the sophists do. When rhetoric is in service of itself, any kind of utterance or writing is dangerous, but not in poetic philosophic utterances drawn to the procedures that will lead to truth. Even if it is poetic, if it leads to truth, it is acceptable. So you cannot dismiss poetry as such. There are poets who are not bothered about truth, but they'll be interested in constructing works that will impress you. They will create works which will be very attractive, which will be very beautiful even, which will impress you tremendously. And to impress you, they will use every rhetorical device. There is nothing wrong with using a rhetorical device, but here they use the device not to serve truth, but for its own sake. That is the difference. A rhetorical device can be used. It should be used to serve truth, to make something clearer. A rhetorical device is not used to impress the others, impress the readers. And that is the difference he's talking about here. When rhetoric is in service of itself, it leads to bad things. When rhetoric is in service of itself, any kind of utterance or writing is dangerous, but not in poetic or philosophic utterances drawn to the procedures that lead to the truth. So now let us coming to the Advent of Plato now. don't have many Platonists around us now, or because it's a very unfashionable thing now to say that you're a follower of Plato. And also, there is a lot of scholarship, and it is very difficult to arrive at the real Plato, buried deep beneath all these scholarly writings. More than that, Plato is an established philosopher. And when you approach an established philosopher or an established writer, it is very difficult to see the radical side of that writer or philosopher. Just think about Shakespeare. Can you imagine Shakespeare as a radical writer now? But he was one, he is one. He is a radical writer. Means that he makes many breakthroughs in his writings. Just think about the poetry in Hamlet. നമ്മളത് ഈ quotations ആയിട്ട് കേട്ടിട്ടോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഷേക്സ്പിയറിൻ്റെതെന്നുള്ള ലെവലിൽ അറിഞ്ഞിട്ടും the problem is that we don't see the freshness of Shakespeare when we read Shakespeare now. We don't read it in its freshness, his texts. We read these texts as Shakespeare's texts. But if you forget the fact that these are written by Shakespeare, you will come across some passages of astonishing poetry. That's what we lose when we read Shakespeare as an established poet. The same is the case with Plato. And also, Plato is unfashionable because a number of modern philosophers have criticized him for making metaphysics so prominent. For example, there are philosophers like Nietzsche, Heidegger, and there's also Derrida, many others. So the first thing that we have to do, or we can do, is to rediscover Plato's contemporaneity. See him as a contemporary. Meaning, find where or find which elements in his thought have contemporary relevance. For example, the idea of the transmigration of souls. It has no contemporary relevance. It only makes people laugh at you. But the rigors of philosophic search, that has a contemporary relevance. The insistence on arriving at the truth, that has a contemporary relevance. So the task is to rediscover the dynamism of Plato's thought, which is now buried under a lot of scholarship and things like that. And this is where he becomes most relevant. Plato's insistence on the question of truth and his engagement with thinkers who reduce truth to a figure in the field of rhetoric makes the thought all the more pertinent now in the present neo-colonial India where we find ourselves, where politics, religion, culture, economy, and many more realms of the kind are caught in experiments in rhetoric. I don't want to comment on this. And these ideas actually come from the thought of Alain Badiou. And Badiou is the only major philosopher living now who proudly announces that he is a Platonist. And that requires some courage because he started his career as a friend and follower of Althusser. He was a Marxist. Even now, he calls himself a communist thinker. He has written books like the Communist Hypothesis, etc. And there was a period during which he was interested in Maoism and all that. There were some French thinkers like that. But let us forget all those things. I too am not interested in his Maoism, his interest in cultural revolution and all. Anyway, the thing is that his commitment to truth is relevant even now. So just as in Plato's time, we have sophists in our own time. Philosophers who tell us that philosophizing will not happen in our time. Philosophizing is not possible. There are philosophers who say that philosophy is not possible. And as a good example, Badiou mentions Wittgenstein. This quote from, whereof one cannot speak, whereof one must be silent. That's how Wittgenstein concludes his work, Tractatus. Whereof one cannot speak, whereof one must be silent. That is, you cannot always speak. In philosophy, there are times when you have to fall silent. And Badiou says, philosophy, however, only exists in maintaining precisely that it endeavors to say what cannot be said. And that is precisely what philosophy is about. That's what Badiou says. If there are things which force you to be silent, you have to talk about it. That is what philosophy is. Philosophy, however, only exists in maintaining precisely that it endeavors to say what cannot be said. That is the business of philosophy. And again, this is the statement with which we have to compare the statement of Wittgenstein, the one by Gorgias, which I quoted earlier. There is not anything, meaning nothing exists, and if there is, it is unknowable, and if there is, and it is knowable, it is not communicable to others. So the philosopher has to go silent. So Plato's attempt was to expose these sophists, and Badiou says that in our time also we find many sophists among us, and we have to expose them. And he does not want to reject them altogether, because sophistry is a kind of brother of philosophy, the shadow brother of philosophy. So the basic point is this: philosophy is to assert that philosophizing is still possible. Even though there are many who believe that philosophy, it's high time philosophy vanished from the scene. The philosopher now has to assert that philosophy is possible, and there are truths to discuss. Counter to sophistry, it is proclaimed that there are truths. But this central proclamation presupposes a specifically philosophical category, which is that of the truth. What is expressed with this category is both that there are truths and that these truths are composable in their plurality a plurality to which philosophy gives welcome and shelter. This is where Matthew, the first round of Plato, the question of plurality. And that's a topic to be discussed in detail, so we are not going into that. The truth simultaneously designates a plural state of things and the unity of thought. And with this statement, we can close. Philosophy is not a production of truth, but an operation carried out on the basis of truths, one that disposes their ease of truths and their epochal composability. So the philosopher is not somebody who sits down and produces truths. Instead, it's an operation carried out on the basis of truths, one that disposes their ease of